In 2016's Stardew Valley, there's a consistent theme of anti-modernization, or retraditionalization, starting at the very opening cinematic. Where this theme comes together most potently is perhaps in how it treats your relationships to the many townsfolk of Pelican Town and its rural surroundings. On its face, the way you make friends is childishly simple. You give people items you think, or know, they'll like as gifts. The process of doing that is quite a bit trickier though, and for a specific reason. Modern life is full of convenience, things that make our lives easier by removing obstacles. And where most games aim to get out of the way of what the player wants to do by designing efficient, readable user interfaces, Stardew Valley resists that urge by refusing to give you convenient ways to engage with the relationship system. Before we get going, I want to make a distinction. What's going on in Stardew Valley isn't what's commonly called disempowerment, although it is pretty close. Whereas disempowerment is usually used in order to make a player character more human and relatable, what I want to examine is how Stardew Valley withholds a convenience from the player in order to bring nuance to the world and narrative through game design. Welcome to Ludocriticism. This is Mini Read, a series where we step back from the big picture and look at single elements from a game. So the relationships in Stardew Valley are pretty superficial at first glance, but the way the player is forced to engage with them makes their inclusion an integral part of the game as a whole. You build relationships with townsfolk by filling a bar of hearts, and you do this by talking to them, completing their delivery requests, giving them gifts, and sometimes getting bonuses from scripted events. But the bar can also decrease if you don't talk to them for a while, give them something they dislike, hurt them somehow, or act like a nuisance around town. The point of these relationships can seem somewhat superficial as well, as it just makes them do things like send you questionably useful recipes, gifts, and allow you to enter their bedrooms. But on the other hand, if you neglect the townsfolk altogether, your experience will likely feel far more sterile, as if you traded the treadmill of the city in for the one of farm living. The problem when you decide to avoid bringing the existential crisis that brought you to Pelican Town in the first place with you and make some friends is that it's surprisingly tricky to actually do these seemingly simple things, because there's no convenient way to actually do them. The delivery quests are likely the first thing you'll notice, but these are on a timer and you might have something really important the next 2 days. Even if you do fetch the item your friend wants, there's the problem of actually finding them. The same goes for when you want to give somebody something you think they'll enjoy in general, and you might start by going to their house, but it turns out they're not there. So what do? Well, you could wait, but again, important stuff to do. Even something as simple as speaking to your friend requires you to actually find them, which can be difficult when Marnie is never in her damn shop when I need another damn cow. Instead of giving you convenient ways of engaging with the townsfolk, you're forced to learn the patterns of behavior that constitute their pre-programmed daily schedules, and these also change with things like weather and the season. As a result, the only efficient way of making friends with people is to become familiar with them. In the modern world, being friends with people is convenient. For example, we can plan to meet without saying a word by attending the same event that's been conveniently coordinated by Facebook. Or if we want to get a hold of a person, we can just send them a text or an instant message. Stardew Valley, however, brings you back to a world where these conveniences are withheld from the player because the game posits that we lose something potentially valuable by making things more convenient and efficient. There are other games that also do this withholding of convenience in order to enrich rather than detract from the experience. In Dark Souls, the game withholds the ability to warp between bonfires, functionally a form of fast travel, because it wants the player to consider its interconnected world in terms of both gameplay and narrative. Another example is BioShock Infinite, which removes the series convenience of carrying every weapon at once in order to force the player to make a choice. This change, interestingly enough, wasn't met with the best reception, which is ironic because the first two BioShock games were criticized for having mechanically meaningless choices. Then there's the design of 2016's Doom, which took a turn toward a video game specific type of retraditionalization when id Software decided to remove things like regenerating health, reloading, and more realistic movement speeds. It posits that something was lost in the modernization of the first-person shooter genre specifically. And in Dragon Quest Builders, the player spends hours building a town that extends into the game as an expression of themselves, only for the game to then tell them that they aren't allowed to keep that same town if they want to progress the story. You need to leave something behind in order to move forward. Now, what this does is create content, not only in terms of the amount of time spent with the game and motivating the player to do so, but also in terms of a type of emergent narrative. The time added to the game is often meaningful because what you do in the game tells you something about its world, its narrative, your character, or maybe even yourself. Granted, you're receptive to what the game is trying to tell you, of course.
Find someone else.
As for emergent narratives, it creates problems the player is forced to resolve if they want to accomplish the task. Problems that wouldn't be there if accomplishing it was more convenient. Let's look at the opposite phenomenon, where designers end up taking both time and emergent narrative away by adding something. The standout example of this is any sort of navigational system, such as the compass in Skyrim. While it's a really good way for the game to get players where it wants them to be, removing it produces a situation in which the player needs to engage with the world in order to solve the problem, instead of being guided by a heavy-handed user interface. In contrast, Divinity Original Sin, along with most old-school style CRPGs, resists this urge to actively guide the player, and that game is an arguably more immersive experience for it, if also much more demanding. And of course, another common feature is the simple fast travel, which to me is only a game admitting that it's not very interesting in the first place. In Stardew Valley, less is more, and the inconvenient ways the player is forced to engage with its relationship system reinforces the game's theme of retraditionalization, but it also leverages the comparatively simplistic elements of that system: talk, give gifts, don't be a nuisance, for maximum result. A decade or so ago, there was an acute lack of polish in games. Menus were a nightmare to navigate, using visual cues to guide players through levels was still unmastered, and frustration came with the playing territory. Since then, however, most genres have gone through their own iterations of increasing polish, and a plethora of conveniences came with those iterations. But convenience and polish are not the same thing, as Stardew Valley shows us. It also shows us that a game can keep its polish while intentionally inconveniencing the player in order to enrich their experience. Not to be confused with disempowerment, which is a characterization tool, inconvenience is about connecting the player to the game's themes beyond the aesthetic level and into the mechanic and systemic realms that only games stake a claim on. Thanks for watching. If you want a really extreme example of inconvenience as a way of communicating with the player, check out 2016's Pony Island. Be warned, it's a weird one. What do you think about things like fast travel and being able to do things quickly through the user interface? Do you enjoy a tough trek through the tundra, or do you prefer to just go where you want to be? Please remember to subscribe, but only if you pick the first option. Also remember to keep taking games too seriously.